In today's passage, Jesus has become extremely popular and everybody is looking for him. Everybody wants a piece of him. Everybody has needs and they are seeking him out. So after they've got back from the other side of the lake in their boat, they find this huge crowd just waiting for them, and everybody wants Jesus. And one of the first people who comes up to him is a very well-respected man in the local synagogue called Jairus. Falls down on his knees and he begs Jesus to help him. Now he's clearly a very deserving case. He has faith. He said, Jesus, come and lay your hands on her so that she can be healed. It's pretty urgent. He says she's at the point of death or near to the point of death. So Jesus heads off in the direction that Jairus is leading to go to his home and to see his daughter. The only trouble is that Jesus is so easily distracted because he's interested in everybody, not just the most deserving of people. And then Mark tells us that there's a woman in the crowd who has suffered from hemorrhages, from bleeding for 12 years, and that she spent everything that she had on doctors, and instead of helping her, the treatments that she's had seem to have made her worse. And he tells us in the text here that she thinks to herself, if only I can just touch the hem of his garment, or maybe it was one of those tassels that Jewish rabbis wore at the back of their coat. And it's so difficult to get close to him because of all the crowds pressing in. Now, just to give you a bit of background story, in Jewish culture, if a woman was bleeding, then she should not have been out and about. She should have been at home in her room. And anyone who touched her would have become unclean. Now, this poor woman, this bleeding has been going on for 12 years, so she shouldn't be out and about. And she touches Jesus's garment, presumably without him knowing. And it tells us in the text that at the moment that she touched him, she felt that she was healed. She felt stronger and she knew that she was healed. Now, Jesus suddenly turns around and says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are saying, "Lord, could have been anybody. You know, there's lots of people here. They're all bumping into you." No, somebody touched me purposefully, intentionally. I felt power going out of me. Now you can just imagine, while all this is going on, this poor man, Jairus, who's in such a rush to get Jesus to his home before his little daughter dies, he must be tearing his hair out because Jesus has become quite distracted by this incident. He wants to know who the person was who has touched him intentionally. And at that moment, this poor woman comes forward and she says, "It was me." And they must have had a conversation. And Jesus, instead of telling her off for disobeying the Jewish rules, he says, "Daughter, go in peace. Your faith has healed you." And so he supports this woman. Now, in those days, women were not important. Every day, Jewish men would start the morning by giving thanks that they were not a woman. But that isn't how God sees people. To Jesus, she was very important. To Jesus, she was just as important as this very important man from the synagogue who wanted him to go to his home and heal his little daughter. And it's just good to note that Jesus overturns the culture of his day, and he ignores completely what people expect of him, and he does what is right. He is motivated by real compassion and genuine care. But one of the servants rushes up to Jairus and says, "Master, tell the rabbi not to bother, because unfortunately your little girl has died." Do not be afraid, only believe. And he continues. He takes just 3 of his closest disciples with him into the house. That would be probably Peter, James and John. And there's such a to-do coming from the house. There were people who were officially paid to wail and to play on flutes and pipes and to bemoan the person's death. And so they were kicking up quite a lot of noise. And Jesus tells them to be quiet. He says, "The little girl is just sleeping, she's not dead." And of course, they mock him at that, because they know perfectly well that the child has died. Jesus speaks very gently to her. "Talitha cum," little girl, get up. Or perhaps it was something like, up you get then, little girl." And he takes her hand, and she sits up and opens her eyes. And of course the parents are just beside themselves with joy and amazement. And Jesus, being practical as ever, gives them something to do. And he says, "I think she might be hungry. Why don't you get her something to eat?" In last week's passage, we noted that only God is able to interfere with the weather, and that by writing about the storm and the way that Jesus commanded the waves and the wind to be calm and to stop was an indication from Mark, the gospel writer, that Jesus was divine, that Jesus was actually God in action. And again, with this passage in the following chapter, Mark would be making the same point. What I find particularly moving is Jesus's concern for an ordinary woman, somebody who has spent all her money on doctors, who's been very poorly for 12 years. She must have been very anemic, but I think probably the most cruel thing would have been these rules about having to stay in the house all the time and not mixing with others, and it would have kept her from the kind of fellowship when the family all got together on a Friday night and had their special meal and lit candles and recounted the events of the past. So this poor woman really would have been quite isolated and would probably have had quite a poor opinion of herself. And to put this poor woman ahead of this very important person who was Jairus from the local synagogue was really unthought of. And I love Jesus for that. The fact that he cares just as much for this woman, and he is not one iota concerned with status or gender. And so he restores to that woman not only her health, but her standing in the community, her emotional and psychological well-being, her social well-being, which is a truly beautiful thing. When we're under pressure It's very easy to give in to those around us, to what they are trying to make us do. They're trying to rush us or to hurry us on. And Jesus withstands that pressure, which shows great strength of character. And he withstands the cultural ideologies around him, and shows that older woman was just as important to him as that important man from the synagogue. The woman had been ill for 12 years, and the little girl, the text tells us, was 12 years old. So that woman had been ill with this bleeding for the whole of that child's life. And Jesus cares for both of them. So whatever your background, whether you think that you're okay or quite a good person, quite an important person, or whether you don't feel very sure about yourself at all, it makes no difference. God sees you as just as important as the next man or the next woman. I find that incredibly comforting, that God judges without partiality, and that he doesn't see us in the same way as we tend to see ourselves or those around us. And his word to you and to me is, do not fear, do not be afraid, only believe. Shall we have a prayer to finish with? Jesus, compassionate healer, loving friend, holy God, we thank you for your love for all of us. We thank you for your judgment that is full of tenderness and equality, and that you do not regard one person as more important than another. We thank you for the story which shows us that you are Lord over life and death, that these are in your hands, and that we are not to be afraid of them. For those of us who have lost someone dear to us, close to us, will you fill us with your peace today? Will you sustain us and help us to stand as we listen to your words? Do not fear, only believe.